All right, so I got an update here for you guys on the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine, this time specifically centered around the failed policies of the United States and Western Europe, specifically relating to sanctions. So here from the New York Times, they say Russia's oil revenue soars despite sanctions. Study finds rising oil prices more than offset a decline in export volumes during the first 100 days of the assault on Ukraine. So we're going to get into some of the details here, but basically, as the headline is saying right there, the explicitly stated goals from the outset of this by the United States and Western Europe was to cripple the Putin war machine and make it basically impossible for him to continue this invasion. So if that's the goal, then this has been an explicit failure. As they say here, the rise in oil prices somewhat due to our sanctions on Russian oil, our refusal to import this to the United States and other countries within Western Europe. That has led to a rise in oil prices on the global market because you're restricting the supply, and therefore has actually given a country like Russia, which a huge amount of their GDP is coming from their oil exports, it's given them the ability to actually profit from that rise in oil prices, and apparently it's more than offset the decline that they've lost from not being able to export to a lot of these countries. So let's get into some of the details here. They say Russia's invasion of Ukraine triggered global condemnation and tough sanctions aimed at denting Moscow's war chest, yet Russia's revenues from fossil fuels, by far its biggest export, soared to records in the first 100 days of its war on Ukraine, driven by a windfall from oil sales amid surging prices, a new analysis shows. And it appears like a large amount of these oil sales that they're still conducting, some of them are still going into European countries, but a large bulk of them are also being exported to China and India, which are taking a very different stance on the invasion of Ukraine than the West has been. So, again, just kind of a reminder here that the United States and our allies, we're not the entire world, and you have entire countries with billions and billions of people in them, like India and China, that are just doing their own things. They're not just going to follow in lockstep with exactly what the United States is doing, which kind of undercuts our ability to deploy these widespread sanctions that are, supposedly going to cripple Russia or back Vladimir Putin into a corner. And listen, I agree with some of the sanctions that have been targeted at Russian oligarchs and Vladimir Putin himself. I don't agree with some of the sanctions that are really just disproportionately hurting average citizens in Russia and also serving to damage our own domestic markets here in the United States, with Americans having to pay higher oil prices, somewhat due to the lack of imports from Russia, but also largely due to just the exploitation of U.S. multinational fossil fuel corporations who are price gouging the American people. So in terms of what the broader picture of this seems to be, seems like we're actually just hurting average Russian civilians, average civilians within Western Europe, average civilians within the United States, while really just completely failing to actually, again, follow through on that stated goal of crippling Putin's war machine. But they continue here saying Russia earned what is very likely a record 93 billion euros in revenue from exports of oil, gas, and coal in the first 100 days of the country's invasion of Ukraine, according to data analyzed by the Center of Research on Energy and Clean Air, a research organization based in Helsinki. And they say about 2/3 of those earnings, the equivalent of almost $100 billion, came from oil and most of the remainder from natural gas. And they got a quote here saying the current rate of revenue is unprecedented because prices are unprecedented, again, largely due to a lot of our actions that we've taken, and export volumes are close to their highest levels on record, said Lori, not even going to try to pronounce that name, an analyst who led the center's research. And they say fossil fuel exports have been a key enabler of Russia's military buildup, and in 2021, revenue from oil and gas alone made up 45% of Russia's federal budget, according to the International Energy Agency, and the revenue from Russia's fossil fuel exports exceeds what the country is spending on its war in Ukraine. The research center estimated a sobering finding as momentum shifts in Russia's favor as its forces focus on important regional targets amid a weapons shortage among Ukrainian soldiers. So a weapons shortage among Ukrainian soldiers. This is coming after billions and billions of dollars that the United States largely, but other countries as well, have been funneling into Ukraine. We have so far given Ukraine, on top of the $40 billion or so package that we sent just a couple of weeks ago. We just announced another $1 billion we're going to be sending on top of that. They say that it's weapons and humanitarian aid. Of course, a vast majority of this is a weapons package, not a humanitarian aid package, but billions and billions of dollars, the largest amount of weapons and funding that we have given to any country, at least in the post-World War II era. And yet it doesn't seem like it's having that much of a material effect in terms of what Ukrainian military forces are able to do on the ground. basically, we're at a virtual stalemate at this point, and as they were pointing out in that New York Times article, and also this other one here, it doesn't seem like this is going to be something that is going to benefit Ukraine in the long run. It seems like they're basically right now, or maybe even we've already passed the point where they would be at their peak in terms of their leverage at the negotiating table. So if you're going to have some push for diplomatic talks, you better get the fuck on that and do it right now, instead of waiting and waiting and waiting, where Russia's position is only going to get stronger over time. So another point of view on that, they say here from the New York Times again, Ukrainian news: as battle grows desperate, U.S. says it won't push Kyiv into talks. Western officials prepared to meet in Brussels this week amid growing European concerns about the costs and risks of war in Ukraine. So European government officials are really much more focused on the diplomatic side of this than the United States has been, but we don't seem to be showing any interest in pushing for that as aggressively as possible. And again, a little bit of important details here. They say Ukraine has been losing as many as 200 soldiers a day in street-by-street fights in dead cities like Severodonetsk in a last-ditch bid to try to inflict as many casualties as possible on Russia. And they say, but a war of attrition favors Russia, which has a much larger military. So again, when you take into broader context, not only the weapons that we've been flooding into Ukraine, which, oh, by the way, the State Department has admitted they don't even necessarily know where a lot of these weapons are going, almost certain that a lot of them are going to end up on black markets. They're going to end up in the hands of countries and organizations and groups that we didn't initially intend for them to end up in the hands of. But, on top of just the weapon side of this, also on the sanctions side of this, clearly, if the explicitly stated goal from the beginning of this was to cripple Putin's war machine, it's not being effective. And not only that, but, again, as time goes on, the Ukrainian position at the diplomatic negotiating table is only going to get weaker and weaker. So what the fuck is the point of any of this? I mean, I'm not in favor of Vladimir Putin. I don't think that anybody who wants to call themselves a leftist should be in favor of an oligarchical government like Putin's one, an imperialist government like Putin's one, but it doesn't mean that you are in favor of the invasion. It doesn't mean you're in favor of Vladimir Putin if you come out and just simply state that, even according to U.S. officials themselves, that our policy has been an abject failure. I mean, again, both on the sanctions and the weapons we've been flooding into Ukraine, it's just not going to be enough. So the only viable alternative that you have at your disposal is diplomatic talks. And yet again, seems like the United States, at least, is not anywhere close to being focused on trying to push for that diplomatic resolution. And at the end of the day, nobody is going to be happy with whatever diplomatic negotiations are going to produce, right? Russia's not going to be completely happy. Ukraine certainly not going to be completely happy, especially if they have to give up territory, which at this point seems inevitable. The United States is not going to be happy because they're going to be losing out on a lot of this, precious money to the military-industrial complex. So everybody's going to have to make some concessions when it comes to negotiating, but that's the only path forward. I mean, this is not a war that Ukraine is going to win in the sense that they're going to be able to, fully push back Russian troops from their territory. That's just not even a feasible thing that's on the table right now. Even with the billions and billions and tens of billions of dollars that we have been giving them in military assistance, they're still losing 200 soldiers a day, which is an absolutely absurd amount, and their position is only weakening over time. So again, it seems like that would be where the focus was if you were serious about ending this war as quickly and efficiently as possible. But on top of this, you also just have the blatant hypocrisy of all of this, especially as relating to the sanctions. I mean, the whole idea of these sanctions was we are going to stop taking oil supplies, natural gas supplies from Putin because he's doing this violent invasion. He's an imperialist, right? He's committing human rights abuses. And then you're going as a solution, as a workaround to that, to go meet with Mohammed bin Salman. I mean, again, to go meet with Saudi Arabia, one of the most violent human rights abusing countries in the entire world, in order to avoid taking oil from Vladimir Putin because of his war crimes and human rights concerns. I mean, it's so stupid because at surface level, it completely undercuts your position. But on top of that, we just learned just a couple days ago, I covered this on my channel, but they say here from Middle East Eye, Biden says Israel's security and not oil prices are the key reason for the Saudi visit. So all right, take this all in a broader picture of things, okay? We levy sanctions at Russia as an effort to try to, diminish their ability to wage this war, okay? Seems like that's not working, right? They're still making, hundreds of billions of dollars from their oil sales, again, with China, India stepping in to basically subsidize the lack of exports to Western Europe and the United States. So on the sanctions front, that's been basically a complete abject failure in stopping the invasion. It's also just served to further exacerbate things like gas prices here in the United States as well as in Western Europe. So So hurting, innocent Americans here in the United States, hurting civilians within Western Europe, hurting Russian civilians again, while basically not really putting Putin's position in jeopardy whatsoever, and definitely not hurting his military capacity in order to continue this invasion. Now, on top of that, you also have the weapons side of it, again, where we're just flooding infinite billions and billions and tens of billions of dollars into this country in weapons support, which it doesn't even look like it's being effective at all. I mean, they're basically at a stalemate. If anything, as time is continuing to go on, this stalemate is going to more and more favor Russia's position in this. So, again, the only actual viable solution is to get to the diplomatic table as quickly as possible and push for that. I mean, that's what it's going to take. But again, seems like we're prioritizing the profits of the military-industrial complex, the priorities of the most hawkish U.S. politicians, and really just sacrificing the entire country of Ukraine in the process of this.